I really want to get into this concept of professional identity. But first, I want to get a bit of a sense of your company, because it's a private company.
Yep.
As far as I know, it's not widely known whether there's a big secondary market that creates an expected, market cap as there is with, for example, Zynga. And is there, by the way, like a secondary market cap that you may pay attention to? Like your shadow private stock price?
We are certainly aware of secondary market activity.
And what is that market cap?
I couldn't tell you.
You don't pay attention to it, no. I'm sure. Not at all. One of you guys find out and yell it out for me. That would be great, because, I can't be...
They're doing it right now.
Yeah, I
like
can see
6
everybody.
People in the front row are like...
So give us a sense, because it actually, in my research, kind of hard to get a sense of the size of your business. The estimates range sort of from $100 million to several $100 million in revenue. And I know you're not going to tell me.
Right.
So I'm just going to guess 250. And tell me how it breaks down.
You didn't lock at my body language for a reaction. You were looking at
No, I'm just looking straight down here.
You need to tell.
Give me a sense of how your revenue streams break down, though, because you have a you're not just one.
Very fortunate to have diverse revenue streams, all of which I think can over time, massively scale. Ad sales. We have a pretty robust marketing solutions ad sales business. We offer premium subscriptions and hiring solutions, which is largely about enabling recruiters to find the perfect candidate. And in 2009, those businesses were, over the aggregate of 2009, pretty evenly weighted. As we exited 2009 and the economy started to show some signs of life, the hiring solutions business really started to take off. And that continued into 2010. And so hiring solutions is our largest and fastest growing business, and arguably the most disruptive of the businesses that we're in.
So you provide sort of access to the professional social graph for people who are responsible for bringing talent into companies. Is that?
That's exactly right. And it's not just for bringing talent into companies. It's also making sure the talent you've already got in your company is set up to be successful. Mm-hmm. So the way we describe that is LinkedIn connects talent with opportunity at massive scale. Scale that was never possible before because we didn't have infrastructure that enabled us to connect theoretically hundreds of millions of people around the world. And we didn't see the kind of behavior that we're seeing today, say 10, 15, 20 years ago, where people are now online. They are presenting themselves, their professional identity, where you started. They're managing their networks of former colleagues, business contacts, current colleagues, and they're sharing information and knowledge within a professional context in unprecedented ways.
How do you measure engagement on the site? Yesterday, Mark said that one of the things he was sort of astonished by was that still, even as Facebook has scaled to over 500 million users, half of them still come back every day.
Yep.
And for him, that was an important measure of engagement. What's your important measure or measures of engagement?
Fairly traditional. Certainly it starts with membership and membership growth. We're at about 85 million members now. We're adding a member a second, which in absolute terms, that member per second is the fastest it's ever been. So to put that into perspective, it took us about 477 days to add our first million members. It took us roughly 9 days to add our last million members. And we're seeing very fast growth overseas. Over half of that membership now comes from overseas. Unique users, we're close to about 60 million unique users. I think Comscore had us about 57 million in September. We're looking forward to seeing the October numbers. Frequency, the rate with which people are coming back, less so on time spent, largely because we're a site that exists to make our membership more productive and successful. And so for us, it's not about passing the time, it's about saving time.
You're not going to be doing a big photo sharing app soon?
Not unless it's going to help you become better at what you do, professionally speaking. So for the
I don't know if most of the photos on Facebook would do that.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, but it's the elephant in the room, or that was in the room. So let me ask you about Facebook. When we talked to Mark yesterday, he was really excited and engaged about a number of announcements that sort of came, if I can paraphrase and condense. All they want to do is create a platform so that vertical industries can leverage the Facebook social graph. Right. So you could build a vertical industry in commerce, for example, or a vertical in IS. So, how might Groupon or Guild feel about that? Yeah. I think a vertical industry in gaming we discussed. So What about a vertical industry using the Facebook social graph in professional identity? Can we have one ring to rule them all?
I think it would be challenging. I think there are certainly going to be industries and verticals where it makes sense to build on that kind of horizontal platform, social utility platform. I think, though, context matters. And I think when it comes to networking, there's essentially three ways to organize and leverage your network. There's the personal, there's your family, and there's the professional. And of course, there's going to be overlap there. But we're solely focused on the professional graph. And time again, we hear that people want to keep, for the most part, their personal lives and their professional lives separate. And having been asked this quite a bit, we've given this a lot of thought, and I think I can explain it in 2 words at this point.
The difference between a professional social graph and a friend's social graph?
And why it's so important to keep them separate.
2 words.
2 words.
Okay.
And the 2 words are keg stands.
Keg stand.
Keg stand. So show of hands, how many people know what a keg stand is in the audience? Not that many. How many people have actually done a keg stand in the audience? Okay.
Okay, well, see, now we just blended the peanut butter and the chocolate right there.
So for those that don't know, you have probably been at parties back in your school days where a keg stand was taking place. Someone was being held upside down in proximity to a keg and was actually drinking directly from the keg in the aforementioned handstand or headstand position. That's the keg stand.
And it was probably also coming out their nose.
Yeah, or other things, yeah. We don't need to go into the graphic detail. But the reason I cite that as an example is the cautionary tale. So while many of us in college probably were at parties having a good time doing things like keg stands or being exposed to keg stands, I don't know that many of us would look forward to having a prospective employer have access to pictures of those events. And it's just one example. You can fill in the 2 words, it's like a Rorschach test. What came to mind when I said
bong hit?
Bong hit. Okay, well that's a Bay Area guy. I'm doing keg stands. I'm from the East Coast. I think that's an East-West thing.
You asked, I answered.
Well, you know what's funny? Michael Phelps. Michael Phelps. Perfect example. An image being taken, because that's what happened.
That did hurt his professional career. I mean, not his swimming career. It hurt his endorsements.
Yeah.
Of course, Timmy Lincecum, on the other hand.
Well, that's West Coast, East Coast, once again. I think Tim actually did better as a result. Pulled down a Cy Young.
That's right. Okay, well, we went, there was a bit of we went down an alley there. I'm going to try to pull us back to the main road here. So in other words, we wouldn't expect necessarily that you're going to wholeheartedly embrace an open graph interconnect between LinkedIn and Facebook.
I think it depends. I think it depends on the value that we could create for members as a result from that, and the value we could create at LinkedIn sustainably over time. I think when it comes to LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, I think people have a tendency to lump all 3 of us and others into a category called social networking. And I don't think that's the case. I think in those 3 examples, you have 3 emerging social platforms. Platforms leveraging social connectivity and social interaction to create value. I think in the case of Facebook, you're talking about something of massive scale and scope that's largely oriented around social utility. And killer apps include things like social gaming, sharing pictures, some of the stuff that you've been talking about up here, status updates. Twitter is a public communication platform. And the following taking place on Twitter, it's largely about broadcasting, microcasting your messaging. A lot of the following is asymmetrical. Just because I'm following you doesn't mean you're following me. We're not connected. But that's about letting people know what you're up to in 140 characters or less. LinkedIn is a professional network.
All these are vertical kind of networks, right? That are developing their own relationship graph of some kind or another.
It's all relative. So I think Facebook and Twitter are certainly horizontal, where verticals can slot in. I think LinkedIn has taken a horizontal approach to one of those very large verticals, which is professional interaction, and fundamentally transforming the way people work.
Now, LinkedIn, until recently, hasn't been particularly, I guess the word might be portable. In terms of creating tools that create an open platform that people can say, I can, at the sites at Federated Media, I can say, hey, bring your LinkedIn identity. Because almost all the sites, certainly in one half of Federated's business, are professional business, technology related. Maybe there's some way of creating a tool for all of those partners of ours so that you can have your LinkedIn identity hanging out on your shoulder when you're at that site. Is this something that you want to address, or do you see no reason to do it?
No, absolutely. Ultimately, we want to work wherever our members are working. We don't want them tethered to a desktop, and we don't want them tethered to LinkedIn.com if that doesn't make sense for them. So we want to push out the functionality to the greatest extent possible, make it ubiquitous. Ultimately, if you are seeking to connect with another professional, if you want to access another professional's identity, if you want to do business with them, bring them an opportunity, we want you to be able to leverage some of our tools and some of our assets. And so one of the ways we do that is by more aggressively investing in our APIs and pushing those APIs out. We're starting to see some pretty good traction on that front. You may see some of that with some of the partners that you work with where, for example, on Amex and the open forum, you'll see somebody's name, you can roll over that name, and then you'll get a mini profile, what we call the mini profile on LinkedIn. You'll be able to click through and fundamentally do business with them.
So you've done some interesting things. I mean, one of the things you guys should know about Jeff and I is that we really sort of first locked, brains around search. And you were at Yahoo, and Yahoo was doing a lot of search when you were, you had to do the integration when they bought 4 or 5 different search assets over the course of a couple of years. You've done something interesting with search at LinkedIn, which you call Signal. Give us a sense of what that is and how it's doing, because it's only about a month old, right?
Yeah, it's a closed beta. We're going to be opening that up soon. But we're really excited about Signal because I think it demonstrates an approach that we're taking to all of this. I think everyone would agree that given the unprecedented levels of sharing we're now seeing, information, knowledge, opinions, ideas, that it's taken information overload to a whole nother level. I mean, we thought as an industry there was information overload when the directories first came around and were helping us organize the web. Those were tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions, single-digit millions of websites. Then Google comes around and starts indexing everything that's digital. And now you're talking about billions and tens of billions of objects. And with these social platforms, you've got billions of shares taking place a day. Billions of social artifacts. And so if we thought we saw information overload previously, we haven't seen anything yet. And as you know, we've only scratched the surface. So whereas in the past, I think as an industry, we've focused quite a bit on relevancy, extracting the signal from the noise. And in each of those ways, whether it was the portal, the search engine, or now the emerging social platforms, I think it's those companies that extract the most signal from the noise, or in this case, the most signal from the stream, that create the most value. And so Signal is literally named after that dynamic. Layering a professional lens, what company somebody works at, what industry they work in, on top of searching real-time status messages or tweets through an integration that we do with Twitter, which completely changes the relevancy of the information you now have access to.
So you're using the professional identity as a filter to understand what corpus of data? Just the corpus that is LinkedIn, or can you turn this signal, for example, against a Google search API?
Well, right now, it's based on the status updates taking place within LinkedIn, and more broadly speaking, ultimately all the updates, and a Twitter integration. So if you're on Twitter and on LinkedIn, you can actually bind your accounts, which you've done. That's actually how I follow you, John.
Right.
And you have a tendency to tweet things that are professionally relevant. And because I'm exposed to that within LinkedIn, and because LinkedIn is solely about a professional context, there's a signal inherent in that just by virtue of being focused on the professional. And Signal, I think, enhances that and takes that further.
Right. Signal happens to be the name of a newsletter that I started about 6 months ago. So
there you go.
I'll see
like
you in
said,
court.
I'll
see you
mine.
in court,
yeah,
buddy.
Please.
I wanted to ask you another question because it's been a theme throughout the past 2.5 days. And we opened with Eric Schmidt, and Google, the news had just leaked that Google was paying, in 2011, they're going to give their entire employee base a 10% raise. And it makes for good headlines in the sort of, pundit sphere when someone big leaves one place and goes to another. Yep. And it seems to be only heating up. And this is sort of comes under the category of talent wars. Yeah. And I asked Carol Bartz, why would an engineer work for Yahoo as opposed to a pre-IPO company like LinkedIn? So this question is in the air. Yep. Given where you stand and that you have a big business in essentially talent,
yes.
What trends are you seeing and what insights can you give to the audience about what's happening out there?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, this whole notion of the talent war. I think what we may be seeing is less about a talent war and more about an emergent talent economy. I don't think this is one of those things that the headlines may go away to some extent. The heat around who's going where today among these large, very attractive, very exciting companies. But what's happening underneath the surface, I think, is more secular. I think, you know, you can go all the way back if you're interested in economic history, and you go back to the beginning, the agrarian age, which gave way to an industrial revolution, which gave way to an information age, arguably a meta-information age. I think one could argue we're at the early stages of the talent age or the talent economy, where it's not just about the information you know or have access to, or the knowledge you know or have access to. It's about the people you know who possess that information and knowledge, because the rate with which our understanding of the world around us is accelerating so quickly, it's not just about having direct access to that information at any point in time. It's about having access to the right people. And in our industry, I think that's heightened. So I think you're starting to see something that's going to become far more pervasive on a global basis. And it's interesting, John, I'm looking at the map ahead of us, and I'm thinking to myself, while I'm sure it makes for a fun kind of parlor game to figure out who goes where and how big those territories are going to be, from LinkedIn's perspective, we want to be a company that helps power the economies of each of those countries, if you will, and the global economy that will emerge from those companies.
Interesting. Now, does this lead to everybody has Ari Emanuel as their agent, is what I'm curious. Because he was saying the same thing at dinner. He said, you know, it's all about the talent. Of course, his definition of talent is very different than perhaps yours or others.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, before we go to questions, and if you have, please come to the mics for questions for Jeff. I've always enjoyed in our private conversations your opinions on other companies. And I'm going to start with a softball because you're a few years out of Yahoo. And you were so integral in when I was covering the search business pretty closely for the book, in getting search really integrated in and getting those teams working at Yahoo. You know, you had a very senior position there, then you left and ended up at LinkedIn. Do you believe that game is basically over, and that sort of Yahoo said, well, it's either Microsoft or it's Google, and it's done?
I don't know that it's over, and I don't think it's over because of some of the dynamics we talked about earlier. I think if you look at the three waves of the evolution of the consumer web, it largely has been about the companies that created the most value and the most disruption sustainably were companies that created the most relevancy. Starting with Yahoo, interestingly enough, as a directory, and the mechanism for relevancy was the surfer. And that didn't scale as we started to see more and more content on the web. That opened the door for Google. And the mechanism for relevancy for Google has been machine learning and the algorithm, which massively scaled. But one of the things, and Google's very heavily investing in this, one of the things that Google can certainly, in all major search engines today, can improve upon is subjective-based queries. Not fact-based objective queries, but subjective-based queries for which the answer is very specific to me and may be better informed by who I know and my social, my professional graph, et cetera. And so I believe Yahoo has a lot of very interesting building blocks to make that possible. And the outsourcing of search from a principal position may make sense for them. But I think it's as important to say what you aren't as it is to say what you are. And when transitioning out of that business from a principal perspective, Yahoo still has this incredible opportunity to revolutionize the browse-based experience or the consumption of digital media, which I don't think is going to be exclusive to either a search operating system and machine learning, or a social operating system and leveraging a graph, or a system that relies heavily on curation and editorial, which I think Yahoo is amazing at. And you can see it in those verticals in their leadership position in things like news, finance, and sports. I think the digital media company of the future, and you obviously spend a lot of time thinking about this, will integrate those competencies in a way that maximizes the value of the browse and the digital media experience. And I think the company that's going to do that and lead the way has yet to fully emerge and assert itself.
I certainly agree with you there. Now, before we get to these questions, and thank you for coming up, I have to ask you this one. one of the themes that ran through the whole conference was financing. And as I understand it, you're in the hundreds of millions of dollars. You are always mentioned in the same breath as a number of other companies that are, quote, poised to go public. You were brought in by Reed and the board, and it struck me you wouldn't have done that had you not seen a IPO on the horizon. How, are you preparing for that?
It's interesting when you said it struck you that I wouldn't have come in unless I saw an IPO on the horizon, and I think this will answer the question as well. I wasn't thinking about whether or not there was an IPO on the horizon. I was thinking about the potential of the company. I mentioned earlier we have about 85 million professionals, and our mission is to connect the world's professionals, make them more productive, successful. And by some measures, there's as many as 500 million professionals in the world. It's a big, big opportunity. And I think that number is going to grow as developing economies grow. Brazil is one of our largest countries in the world now. And for us, that's the end game. Whether or not we were to go public or raise money in a private transaction of some nature, those are tactics that will ultimately enable us to fully realize the potential of the company. And you had Yuri up yesterday, and I think companies like DST, other private equity companies, have certainly changed the game. They've created other options for companies. So you don't necessarily need to go public as one stepping stone on the way to realizing a much larger ambition. So we'll see.
We'll see. You talking to Yuri backstage? Was there a deal?
You were talking to Yuri backstage?
No,
I didn't see Yuri back. I didn't see Yuri here.
Okay. Let's get to the questions.
Hey, John.
Hey.
So to answer your question, as of today, Facebook's market cap, according to SharePost, is $40.8 billion. Zynga's $5.4 billion. Twitter $3.3. Thanks to Yuri, up 8% from yesterday, and LinkedIn's $2 billion. So
$2 billion. There you go. Love that crowdsourced audience. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah. Hi, Jeff.
Hi. I'll get you next. Hi.
Go ahead.
Hi.
Me?
Yeah, and then we'll go over here.
Sure, yeah. So I don't see a lot of competition in your space for the professional network. Does that worry you? For instance, in Facebook, you have MySpace or High Five and all that. But then, on the LinkedIn, there are not many competitors. It's just LinkedIn and you own the major market share. Why is that? Or does that worry you that there is no competition? Or who do you think is your competition?
Yeah, I think critical mass matters in this business. And I think based on the vision of Reed and the founders, LinkedIn has been around for 7 years now. And I think over time, within our context, our area of focus, the professional, I think 85 million members, a new member every second, I think we have begun to establish critical mass, certainly on a global basis. And I think in that regard, size matters. So I think if you were trying to build a global professional network today from scratch, it's going to be challenging. That doesn't mean there isn't competition out there. I think, broadly speaking, you have other social ecosystems that could be fertile ground for a new company, a company no one has heard of yet, that doesn't exist, to come in and do something different. I would certainly hope that the focus we have on innovation and on research and development would make that less likely, that we'll be the ones to innovate on top of this professional graph. I think it's going to be very interesting to see how things play out in the enterprise. Increasingly, a lot of talk, a lot of focus about how to make the enterprise more social. We come at that from a very different perspective. We put our individual professional members first, and we're essentially a consumer web company. That's our DNA, is creating the best possible user experience for the individual, as opposed to the best product to sell to a decision maker within the enterprise. But that will also, I think, lead to some interesting competitive dynamics. And of course, I mentioned earlier, our largest and fastest growing business is hiring and the realm of hiring solutions, and there are certainly a number of companies doing interesting things there.
Thank you. Over here.
First of all, I'd like to say thank you guys for having this Web 2.0. I've learned more in an hour with you guys than I have in a long time, so thank you.
Well, thank
Everybody
you for coming.
who put this together. I think you answered my question on the last part, and that particularly was, do you see a lot of people hiring from LinkedIn versus like Monster.com? And if so, which probably if so, what do you feel is the key to that success in there, that people more likely to get hired at LinkedIn than they are at Monster.com or something like that?
Yeah. So what's interesting about the position that we're in right now is we're able to do some things that haven't been possible before. LinkedIn didn't invent networking, professional networking. What LinkedIn did is it manifested professional networking online. And just was the case with Google. You know, Larry and Sergey didn't invent the dynamic where we all try to find the things we're looking for. They manifested it online. And when you manifest behavior, offline behavior online, a couple of things start to happen. You start to massively scale that process, and you make it more effective. You make it faster, more efficient. And as a result, we can do some things within the realm of recruiting that have never been possible. So for example, when recruiters will typically post a job, they'll be inundated by what's referred to as active candidates, people who are actively seeking a job who'll submit their resume. And for attractive positions, recruiters will be sifting through literally thousands of resumes, especially when times get tough macroeconomically. And that's not where a recruiter's time is best spent. A recruiter's time is best spent when they identify the perfect person for the role. And so the question is, how do they find the perfect person? And what's happening on LinkedIn is people are updating their profiles when they're not looking for work, because it makes them more successful in the jobs they're already in. And as a result, we're building out arguably the most valuable asset for recruiters as it pertains to being able to search for passive candidates. And that's very transformational for the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Quickly, because we're running out of time. So,
about a year ago, you guys opened a European office from the Netherlands. Can you share anything about that, what you've learned from the Dutch users?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I'm smiling just because we have learned something so specific. So for those that don't know, the Netherlands is our most engaged market in the world. So we actually, I had a chance to take a trip out to Amsterdam. We opened up subsequently an office there, a dedicated office, sales and marketing office, to meet with customers and to do member meetups to find out what was going on. And it turns out some of the explanations are very obvious. So the Netherlands has a history of being really marketplace-oriented as a culture, hotbed for true multinational companies, one of the most internet-connected companies, or countries rather, in the world. But what was most interesting and insightful is the fact that in the Netherlands, the business culture tends to be very flat and meritocratic. So people, mid-level managers, won't hesitate to invite, say, the CEO to connect with them, whereas in more hierarchical cultures, that would never take place. So those are some of the things that we've learned.
Interesting. Last question, then we have to stop, I'm afraid.
Thank you for the conversation. I just have a quick question in regard to...
Can you speak into the mic a bit so we can hear?
Hi. Thank you for the conversation. I have a quick question in regard to China. I wasn't sure whether you are in that country or not, and to the extent you are in, do you run into similar problems like Google if the government doesn't want certain people to be associated with, people internationally or sensitive information? Thank you very much.
Thank you. We are in China. It's one of our fastest growing countries in the world, along with Brazil. I think developing economies, certainly we tend to see a lot of growth in those markets. And one of the things that's interesting about LinkedIn and being focused on creating economic opportunity for people is the fact that we can truly add value in countries like China. And so that's the situation we're in right now, I think, as China becomes an increasingly important player in the global economy, not just obviously the economic growth of China, that there's room to leverage the world's largest global network.
You haven't run afoul of any government bodies in China?
No, to the contrary. I think people are excited about the prospects for how LinkedIn can stimulate economic opportunities for people. And we see that all over the world.
Well, I'd like to keep going, but unfortunately we've run over time. And please join me in thanking Jeff for coming and speaking to us today. Thank you, buddy.